Sri Aurobindo is describing the role of renunciation in the practice of the integral yoga, and he redefines this word to distinguish it from its conventional use in a life renouncing philosophies and yogic practices. He first observes that for us, renunciation must be merely an instrument and not an object. So it is a means for something else. It is not even a chief instrument, because our object is a positive fulfillment of the divine, and renunciation is a negative means which cannot lead to a positive result. So the use of renunciation can only be for the removal of what stands in the way of the positive fulfillment. And in this sense, we have to not be attached either to life in the world or escape from the world. Both are merely different domains of the same purpose of fulfillment of the divine. But the key word he is using is we must have no attachment to. So no attachment to life in the world or no attachment to escape from the world. The key word here is attachment. Attachment to anything is going to limit and bind us. Now in the next paragraph, which we briefly read last time, but which now we will dwell upon, he elaborates on what it means to not have attachment or desire for anything. And that is the nature of the renunciation which has to be practiced, the full scope of which he is still developing over a few paragraphs. So he says here, again, our renunciation must obviously be an inward renunciation, especially and above all, a renunciation of attachment and the craving of desire. So if our goal is the divine fulfillment, obviously in life, in the world, therefore renunciation can only be an inner renunciation and not an external renunciation. And yet, it is an inner renunciation of external things, or inner renunciation of attachment to or desire for external things. And this is what he is now putting in scope. Broadly, three facets of renunciation which represent three knots which bind us to our lower nature. He says, a renunciation of attachment and the craving of desire in the senses and the heart, of self-will in the thought and action, and of egoism in the center of the consciousness. So these are the three things which we have to renounce. But in renouncing these three things, there are two kinds of, or two variations of the binding to each of these three things. One is attachment, and the other is craving of desire. The two go very close together, but are quite distinct. Attachment is when we find ourselves bound to this, and without this, we are unable to be or to function. Or if this changes, we are again disoriented or dislocated or pushed off center. So attachment is literally something which connects and fixes us to another, that the movements and changes in the other affect us. Desire is, and the craving of desire is the pull and push towards that thing to which we are attached. So if we use the analogy of a rope, the fact that I am tied to that object. The length of the rope or the existence of the rope is the attachment, preventing me from wandering too far. The elastic movement of the rope, expanding or contracting, pulling me or repelling me, pushing me away, is the craving of desire, and it could be in either direction, towards or away from. Both are just different facets of the same. So if we use here an analogy of the dog, and you have seen probably people taking a dog for a walk with a rope in hand, and sometimes the rope has a little device by which you can shorten the rope or lengthen it. So you let the dog a little loose, it wanders quite far, and when you find it is going to do something to disturb someone else, you tighten the rope and the dog is pulled, and unwillingly it is pulled back. And you see here the play of the desire, the energy pulling you, containing, restraining, and the means by which the desire operates is the rope itself, the attachment. So these two are subtle, different, tied together, but they're different things, and we need to work upon them slightly different way. So there are three things to which we have attachment and craving of desire. First is in the senses and the heart. This is the domain where we feel ourselves, we will say it would be the lowest level of our evolution. It is something common even in animals. In animals, you will find the reference point to everything is the desire and attachment to things seen through the senses, and behind the senses, it is an emotion which is moving. And this is the portion we have inherited from animal nature in our evolution, and it represents the lowest of the three knots. We will find, for example, we are passionate about something, and that heart's passion to this binds us, and therefore compels us now to dance to the tune of that thing to which we are passionately attached. A person, a situation, an environment, an idea, a relationship, any of these things. The passion itself, which on some level we enjoy greatly, becomes for us the restriction, the limitation, the binding, which is cause of great suffering, great pain, when things don't work out the way I would want them to. This is the reason why you will find in most celebrations of romance, it is described as bittersweet. On the one hand, there is sweetness to romantic love. On the other hand, there is the compelling accompaniment of bitterness, pain, suffering, precisely because the nature of the love is an attachment and desire-bound love. So Sri Aurobindo will shortly discuss what is the true love and in what way this attachment and desire spoil or limit the true love. So this is the first level, and it is for most human beings because rooted in our animal origins, the most difficult to get free when we have a strong vitality, a strong energy, or strong enthusiasm, or love for life, joie de vivre, as they say. So people, especially who are always flowing in circumstances, full of energy, find their biggest struggle with this level. Attachment and craving of desire in the senses and the heart. And the heart, of course, connects to things through the senses. So there is a subtler layer which is on the surface machinery of the senses, where, for example, you are attached to comfort of temperature. You're attached to certain kinds of food. You're attached to certain requirements of clothing or a certain environment. Even if it is attachment to cleanliness and neatness of environment, it is still an attachment. The next level, which is more properly belonging to the human development, is the attachment and craving of desire in the thought and action. And so again, here you have this internal and external, just as there was first the heart and the senses which connect outward. Here it is the thought and then the action, because from the thought emerges the conscious personal will and the drive of action from there. And here we will find the nature of the attachment is less sticky. But still, when the mind is not trained, it can be as difficult to get free of, especially if a person is naturally a thinking person. The very mold and mindset of your thinking binds you, limits you. You look at the world through a certain paradigm, a certain worldview, a certain mindset, oblivious to the fact that each person has a unique mindset. And when someone else sees differently, they are as convinced of their correctness as you are of yours from your mindset and perspective. So of this, Sri Aurobindo has a significant elaboration, so we won't develop this more. In the next paragraph, he describes this whole experience as a spider in its web. It's a very fascinating description and goes very deep into the whole psychology of how the mind works. And this binding in our thoughts, in our thought perspective and the action from there, is something which is very skillfully used by advertisers. They know exactly how to slant your mind by playing it in certain ways. Effectively, you will find you are compelled to behave, to think in certain ways, and from there to feel in certain ways. Even if you know what they have done, you will find yourself unable to avoid it. So I'll give a few examples when we get to the next paragraph. And it's remarkable to see, when we observe ourselves in this way, how deeply embedded and bound we are in the habit of our nature, even in thought and in emotion. And behind all this is the third knot, that is egoism, the attachment and craving of desire, and egoism in the center of the consciousness. And this is, of course, the most difficult to be free of, but it is here that finally one gets free. Even if you get free from the other two to some extent, the knot is still in this sense of separateness, I and the not I, and the parameters we have set to define what I am and what is not I in the rest of the universe. And the sense of separateness is so unavoidable to our idea of individuality, that if that sense of separateness begins to thin, we get somewhat disoriented, because everything now becomes blurred. It is no more clear, black and white, I versus not I. I find myself as if unformed, non-existent, and one is disoriented in the normalcy of action. So this Sri Aurobindo will deal with in great detail in the paragraph after that. So this also we don't elaborate now. But he now explains, for these things are the three knots by which we are bound to our lower nature. And if we can renounce these utterly, there is nothing else that can bind us. And so he has gone to the very root of the problem of these three knots. But what binds us in these three knots, the mechanism of the binding, is the attachment and craving of desire. So if we are able to work on the attachment and craving of desire, even on one of them, then from there it becomes easier to work on the others. So the means for this freeing from attachment to craving and desire, which Sri Aurobindo will lay as a foundation for the integral yoga proper, in the yoga of self-perfection, is the equality. And as we are able to establish in ourselves an equality in the emotions and the senses, in the thoughts and the will to action, and then in the whole being to stand back and be free even of the sense of I, then automatically this sense of attachment and desire begins to thin out and weaken, and then we are able to intervene on it and finish the process, finally loosen and release the fine threads. So now he lays out the scope of this. To what extent do we have to be free of attachment and desire? So he says, therefore, attachment and desire must be utterly cast out, nothing to be remain. Utterly. And now he gives a list. There is nothing in the world to which we must be attached, not wealth, nor poverty, nor joy, nor suffering, nor life, nor death, nor greatness, nor littleness, nor vice, nor virtue, etc. So in these polarities, he is setting a scope, a range. And these are two extremes which we rarely recognize as equally erroneous. So for example, when people speak of not being attached, not having desire, they would mean by that normally to wealth, to joy, to life, to greatness, to vices. Because these things are bad from a spiritual point of view. Oh, that's the common thinking because of the ascetic, the habit of the ascetic framework. But what people don't realize, and this is quite subtle, is that you can have attachment to the very opposite. In order to be free of attachment to wealth, you end up exaggerating poverty. In order to be free of attachment to greatness, you decry greatness to such an extent that you now celebrate littleness. In order not to be proud, you exaggerate your sense of humility. And these exaggerations are equally erroneous from the spiritual perspective. So there is an example of a disciple who goes to his master or who prays to God, you can change the story, and says, "Make me your most humble disciple." In the face of it, he is asking for humility. But notice, so God responds, even in your humility, you want to be the greatest? I want to be the most humble. So in your humility, you become vain, you become proud, you get exaggerated. I am the most humble of all. So there are many stories in the Bhakti tradition, in the Puranas, when Narada becomes proud that he is the greatest, the most humble, the greatest in devotion to God and so on. And then Vishnu has to teach him a lesson and things like that. And all of these stories are intended to point to this other side, the correction. But human nature being what it is, the moment we try to free ourselves from one thing, we tend to swing to its opposite, not realizing that we attach ourselves even more to that. There was a comment, for example, when Mahatma Gandhi had this practice of weaving homespun cloth, living in his cottage and things like that, all the practices of austerity and poverty. One of the government officers assigned to look after him made a comment, "Do you realize how much it costs the government to keep him poor?" If you think about it, the whole thing, it changes your perspective. In the same way, we find tendencies, exaggerations in various ascetic traditions. So wealth you throw it away to demonstrate how you are free from desire and attachment to wealth. So the demonstration of throwing it away is supposed to boost your sense of importance, the greatness of your spiritual attainment. But if you notice, it's quite obvious that the person is proud of his ability to throw away wealth. And there are, again, examples like this when, I think in the life of Mahatma Gandhi, that somebody gave him a check for a very large sum and he tore it up, threw it away, things like that. The idea is, by denying that which is attractive to others, I have now become free of it. But in the process, one attaches oneself to the opposite, and in this case, to poverty, or to suffering, or to death, to littleness, or even more subtly, virtue. By proving that I am free of the vices, I have become attached to my virtue. There's a very interesting incident. Mahatma Gandhi's son came to meet Sri Aurobindo, and Sri Aurobindo narrates this, I think, in the evening talks. He says, Gandhiji's son asked him, he saw Sri Aurobindo smoking a cigar. He said, "Why are you attached to smoking?" Sri Aurobindo replied, "Why are you attached to non-smoking?" And then Sri Aurobindo says, he didn't say anything more and he left. It is interesting that when the conventional mindset of morality, of ethics, meets this question, it does not know what to do. It loses a reference point. Because it's very convenient to take a poise that this is bad and I am now doing good by not doing the bad. But in the process, you are so entrenched in the goodness and your idea of goodness and trapped in it even, that you do not see that through that goodness you deceive yourself. I am tempted to read out from Sri Aurobindo's Thoughts and Aphorisms. Can you bring it? Achha. So where, I must get the exact text. If you don't mind, I'll just get it. It is too beautiful to paraphrase, so I would rather read it out as it is. So there are many related aphorisms. First, which I read, which is related, not the one which I wanted to read out. The sense of sin was necessary in order that man might become disgusted with his own imperfections. It was God's corrective for egoism. But man's egoism meets God's device by being very dully alive to its own sins and very keenly alive to the sins of others. So we notice how we are so tricky about somebody else making an error, and the moment we make the same error, we quickly cover it up, not even allowing ourselves to face our error. And when someone points it out, we rush to justify, oh, but, and there are many reasons we can give to justify that failure or that lapse. So there is So there's another one, which is again not yet what I wanted to read. Be not deceived by men's shows of virtue, neither disgusted by their open or secret vices. These things are the necessary shufflings in a long transition period of humanity. So there are a series of such. Another, the medieval ascetics hated women and thought they were created by God for the temptation of monks. One may be allowed to think more nobly both of God and of woman. And the very next one says, if a woman has tempted thee, is it her fault or thine? Be not a fool and a self-deceiver. And then he gives the solution, and this is where this whole discussion is headed in the text we are reading. There are two ways of avoiding the snare of woman. One is to shun all women, and the other to love all beings. So this is what I'm still waiting to find. So there are many such aphorisms where he prepares the mind precisely to free itself from these narrow formations in which we tend to bind ourselves. And often you will have one aphorism which asserts one thing and another which shows the very opposite, and then a third which shows you a still bigger picture. But in each of these, step by step, he frees the mind and raises it to a larger, freer vision. And so we can use this as a tool for shifting our perspective and freeing the mind from precisely these limitations which we are now discussing. So this is the aphorism which I wanted to read out. My lover took away my robe of sin and I let it fall. The lover here is the Lord, Shri Krishna. Took away my robe of sin and I let it fall, rejoicing. Then he plucked at my robe of virtue, but I was ashamed and alarmed and prevented him. It was not till he wrested it from me by force that I saw how my soul had been hidden from me. So there is the robe of virtue which covers the soul, and then there is the robe of vices. And we're happy when those vices go, but the robe of virtue, it was not till he wrested it from me by force that I saw how my soul had been hidden from me. And so this is an experience in the divine play, in the spiritual journey, that somewhere along the way, having done all of our efforts to develop all the good things, right things, make the efforts in the right way, somewhere along the way we have bound ourselves, got trapped into this robe of virtue and are unable to free ourselves from it. I was ashamed and alarmed and prevented him. Imagine if your virtues are taken away from you, what is left? You face the world with shame because you don't have virtues anymore. What will people think? What will people say? What am I worthy of? Am I even worthy of being I in my own eyes? So there is this shame, and then there is this fear, alarm, and you stop it. And that's when the divine has to forcibly tear away this. And it is such a freedom after that. And then you can face yourself and you realize you are not the virtue either. You are neither the vices nor the virtues, but something altogether different. So there are many others which further sin and charity and things like that, which is worth reading on our own. I'm tempted to share an experience. This happened many years ago when I was going through an internal crisis. I was struggling to remove the layers of self-deception, and I came to a point where finally something had been cleared. But through it all, I had managed to retain the veneer of the public image. Nobody knew what a painful passage I had been through, and there was still a kind of a social front which was intact. And then some peculiar events happened, completely outside my control, and I found myself perverted in the eyes of people, community, things like that. Some software I had written which was completely perverted to present a different picture, whatever it was. So I struggled with it for a long time. There was this reaction of righteous indignation. How dare you say this, distort this? My intentions were so clear, and so on. And it went on and on. It wouldn't stop. It was as if crushing me, pushing me to a certain limit where I had to let go helplessly. And the last stage reached when I was clinging to this image. Oh, this image cultivated and assiduously held and kept clean all these decades. And on the last stage, I found I couldn't anymore. It was just impossible. And I had to let go. And as I released it, suddenly there was this huge freedom, immense clarity and peace. And I began to laugh. I said, this is what the mother was leading me to. And I was clinging to this image, clinging to this idea of what people think. It doesn't matter. Now I'm free to do exactly what I want. I don't have to worry about what people think. It was such a great relief, such a great release that I began to laugh. To something of this kind of experience. The way it happens in each one's life is different, but it does happen inevitably that the divine has to tear this robe of virtue, and things are very different after that. But this is the idea in each of these pairs. There is a pair, there is one side of the pair that we are happy to let go. So, attachment and desire must be utterly cast out. There is nothing in the world to which we must be attached, not wealth, nor poverty, nor joy, nor suffering, nor life, nor death, nor greatness, nor littleness, nor vice, nor virtue. And in each of these, there will be at least one that we would be happy to let go. And then there is the other, which we have a great difficulty in letting go. So it may vary with persons. For some people, to let go of poverty is easy. To let go of wealth is difficult. For others, to abandon wealth is easy. But to let go of attachment to poverty is difficult. And it varies according to one's temperament. But in each case, we have to consciously develop the freedom from both. The prayer which Aurobindo gives, which is called Radha's prayer, has towards the end this particular formulation. Whether he says, whether happiness or suffering, pleasure or pain, whatever comes to me from thee will be welcome. So if this attitude is whatever comes, whether it is happiness or suffering, pleasure or pain, it is coming from the divine, because there is nothing other than divine. One puts oneself in that relationship. And then he says, each one of thy gifts will be always for me a gift divine, bringing with it the supreme felicity. So to see each of these equally as a gift from the divine is what frees us and leads us to the supreme felicity. This is exactly what he's going to tell us at the end of this paragraph in the right way to enjoy with delight. So, nor vice nor virtue. And after these pairs, he gives a series of singles, but of various facets of our life, of relationships. Nor friend, nor wife, nor children, nor country, nor our work and mission, nor heaven, nor earth. nor all that is within them or beyond them. So we have to give up attachment to all these things. Doesn't mean you give up the friendship. You give up attachment to the friendship. So first friend, then wife. So it easier, if you notice, it is easier to give up something on which we are not dependent. It is more difficult to give up something where we are dependent. And so there is a subtle sequence in this whole formulation. But if you look at it this way, the friend is somebody who is not a blood tie. Wife, intermediate, and then children, the blood tie. And in history, you see this great disease of people in power succumbing to their attachment to their children. Unable to, knowing full well that their children are doing wrong, unable to act against it, to chastise their children or to deny their children whatever they ask and so on. So in popular parlance today, we call it Dhritarashtra syndrome. In the Mahabharata, there is Dhritarashtra, whose son is doing all these perversions, but Dhritarashtra, who is blind, keeps saying, what can I do? I'm helpless. He does this. I can't help it. After all, he is my son. I can't give up on him. And this blindness, which is a physical blindness, now becomes symbolic. A refusal to see the weaknesses of those to whom you are attached. So it takes various forms, more subtle, when it is not a physical child, but somebody who is like a child to you. So in any hierarchy of power, you will have the head has somebody who is like a favorite, who has worked with him and really dedicated his life to this head. And the head cannot live without this support, this help. And for him, it is like a child and is blind to the person's weaknesses or perversions, unable to intervene even if he wants to. And that's the Dhritarashtra syndrome, a self-chosen, self-inflicted blindness. But all these still would fade when you look at a larger purpose, a larger cause, which is selfless. So far, all these were personal. The first set were subjective, the second set are objective, but still personal. But when you look beyond personal, I'm doing this for society, for the greater good, for country. Even that is the mission given to me. That is my work on earth, even if it is for God or my idea of for God. Now, at that stage, we have moved beyond the personal, and even there can be attachments. So he says, nor country, nor our work and mission, even the idea that I came for this and I'm attached therefore to this, even that has to go. Nor heaven, nor earth, nor all that is within them or beyond them. So now this is covering everything which is in manifestation. Earth, things within earth, things beyond earth, things within heaven, things beyond heaven. And after that, there's nothing else left. You have to be attached to none of these things. And if you put such a difficult sounding task to be free of all these, what do you do? What am I going to enjoy? How will I live life? What do I live for? That's the practical question. If I find myself suddenly freed from all these attachments. There's a joke which came in Reader's Digest. It was a Marine in the, let's say, an army man who goes to the doctor with some serious illnesses. And the doctor says, well, my son, you have to now take up a very difficult life for the next whatever number of months or years until you get well. No smoking, no drinking, and no sex. And so the poor military fellow gets very upset. He says, doctor, what do I live for then? And this is the practical question. When we say get free of all attachments from all these things, all right, maybe it is not these, but something else which we need as a compulsion for which we do. And this is where we find the root of the human problem. We need an attachment to feel needed, to feel wanted, to feel purposeful, to have a direction, to be compelled, even if it is an attachment of compulsion of your own nature and the framework of your nature, which you didn't choose, just happens to be there, but that compels. And we need the pull and push of desire to give it the spice, the enthusiasm, the interest, the energy, as they would say. If there is not some drive of desire, where do I get the energy to do? If there is not the attachment, what sets the direction? So you come back to the analogy of the rope. The rope is the direction. You pull the dog. The force of pulling is the drive, the energy which compels. So these are two closely associated but different things. We need both to set direction and then the energy to push. Even if it is a negative push, I hate this and therefore I end up doing things. The extreme of the hatred pushes me to act, to counter it, to overcome it, or to find the opposite, etc. If nothing else, to turn to spiritual life, I must be disgusted with life. I must be fed up with all the problems of life. I must have found myself now unable to solve my problems. Then I turn to spirituality. And now I say, I have given up all my attachments. Let me lead a spiritual life. So I think it is Ramakrishna Paramahansa who says, the tiger, when it loses its teeth, will happily become vegetarian. Doesn't have a choice. I've become old. My biology does not function anymore. Even the drive of desire is now so weakened. Now I can turn to spiritual things. But this is the thinking also among young people. We had a meeting a few weeks ago in Varanasi, and it was a gathering of religious leaders from all different traditions. And then there was one rabbi, Rami Shapirov, very provocative, very inquisitive, and he's a very interesting man. Being a rabbi, he has equal exposure to Vedantic traditions and studies and all kinds of things. So he was moderating a session where each one of the three persons spoke about how one has to bring into the world these ideas, and the young people should be taught this and shown this and prioritize their values, their relationship with nature, the earth, ecology, etc. So after all this was done, this rabbi asked, all this which you're saying is so wonderful. Why is it that all of us sitting here are talking to each other and nobody out there is willing to listen? What's the problem? Why aren't the young people coming and listening to you? It was a very provocative question. And there was another round where everybody wanted to say why they thought it was so. And discussions ranged from, well, it's the decline in humanity, young people are not interested, or to it is not being communicated in the right vocabulary. We have to say it in an interesting way, then they will be interested. And then I got my chance, I said very simply, they're just not interested. They respect all these wonderful ideas. But something in the instinct of the young person, hot-blooded, passionate, intense, wants to experience life, wants to do all these things which he is capable of doing before he moves to a stage where he has to give it up. Knowing full well that eventually he will have to give up many of these things, he wants to experience them, and that's the instinct of nature. In a sense, it's a kind of a self-fulfillment, affirmation of your individuality, of your energy, of your capacity, of your freedom. And it's an instinct. It recognizes all these wonderful things which the spiritual people say. It respects them, even bows down before them, but it says, not yet. First, I want to enjoy the world, then all this. And so we have to ask ourselves where this comes from. And after all, if we are being asked now to get free of all these attachments, what is it that remains in us, which is the drive, the motivator for doing these things, whatever, even these wonderful spiritual things? We need something, isn't it, as human beings? And now Sri Aurobindo takes us to the crux of what the true spiritual, affirmative spiritual life is like. And the affirmative spiritual life does not abandon interest, enthusiasm, love, and relationships, or even deep relationships and intimacies. It does not abandon any of these. It abandons attachment and desire. But how can you have all these without attachment and desire? And so this is where we come to the crux of the problem. And Sri Aurobindo formulates it thus. It's a very simply stated sentence, but very deep in its implications. And he says, and this does not mean that there is nothing at all that we shall love, nothing in which we shall take delight. For attachment is egoism in love and not love itself. Desire is limitation and insecurity in a hunger for pleasure and satisfaction, and not the seeking after the divine delight in things. One sentence. And then he elaborates, a universal love we must have, calm and yet eternally intense beyond the brief vehemence of the most violent passion. A delight in things rooted in a delight in God that does not adhere to their forms but to that which they conceal in themselves, and that embraces the universe without being caught in its meshes. So there is going to be a love, a universal love. So it is not restrictive, it is not narrow, and it is not flat, it is not monotone, it is intense beyond the brief vehemence of the most violent passions. Imagine the most extreme and violent passion which you might have, and even that is too small compared to this intensity of that universal love which we will have. And equally, the delight in things will be a delight which embraces the whole universe. So how are we to go from this to that? On the one hand, we have the need for some attachment and desire to feel that we have a purpose and meaningful life and drive of life. And we're asked to abandon the attachment and desire and move to this. It's a nice promise. It sounds great to have this universal love which is intense beyond, and this delight in the whole universe. But what's the relationship? So this is the skill with which Sri Aurobindo is able to articulate the relationship. He shows you a continuity from this to that. And then he shows you how this, which we experience in human life as the life of attachment and desire and drives which come with it, are a distortion and limitation of that. And the moment we see this continuity, we remove the distortion, we remove the limitation, and we are freed into this universal love and delight in the universe. And now it is not dropping this and creating something else, but making a smooth passage from this to that. But the way he articulates is so pithy, so compact, that we need to dwell on it more deeply to fully appreciate. So first he reminds us that all this renunciation of all these things does not mean that you will have nothing left. It does not mean that there is nothing at all that we shall love, nothing in which we shall take delight. Yes, we will take delight, we will have love, and to all things even. But what is it that is preventing us? He says, attachment is egoism in love and not love itself. Now remember, we discussed this rope and the pull and push of the rope, attachment and desire. So now attachment, he is associating with, or when freed from its distortion, becomes love. the bond of love, the cord of love, or the embrace of love. And on the other hand, he says, desire, remember that's the pull-push of the attachment, the energy pushing and pulling. Desire is limitation and insecurity and a hunger for pleasure and satisfaction, and not the seeking after the divine delight in things. So this is going to be transmuted into the seeking of the divine delight in things. There is a seeking, there is an enjoyment of it, but this is a limitation in which there has been a narrowing, an insecurity, a limiting, and hungering for pleasure and satisfaction as distinct from delight in things. So attachment and the drive of desire have now as if been transmuted into this love, embrace of love on the one part, and the other is the seeking after the delight in things. And the transition from one to the other is what we are looking at. To fully appreciate the transition, we'll take a few examples as we go along. Love of the most violent passion. But that is the liberated love. And from there, when there is a narrowing, that he describes as egoism in love, and that becomes attachment. When my love narrows itself, defines the love in terms of this and not that, it is cutting off the full scope of the love from its universality, taking a piece of it and then binding to that piece, and then it becomes egoism in love, which is attachment. You remove those barriers, those limitations, and let the heart open equally to all things. Allow that which you love to freely flow and change and grow as it chooses, and even to freely play in the changing of its relationships with you. And then you will find the egoism thins out, fades out, and gradually opens out to this universality of the love. So if you take an example at a very material human level, let's say you fell in love with, in teenage, your classmate or someone in the other class. Always, it's easier to fall in love with someone who's farther away, less reachable, because then you can idealize more easily. So you've fallen in love with this other, in some other class. And every time you think of her, him, you feel this wonderful feeling, the whole world seems magical, and you wake up in the morning and you're thinking of your beloved, and the bird sings and your heart sings with the bird, and it's such a beautiful feeling. And then suddenly, in the midst of all this beautiful feeling, this object of your love walks by, and there's a kind of a narrowing, there's a shock, because now this object does not give you that feeling. The bird gave you that feeling when you were feeling in love, but the object passing by caused pain, because it is an object which you cannot have, an object which is beyond your reach. If only I could get that person, affection, form of love that I seek, if only, then I would be truly happy and I would come back to this wonderful feeling. And it never works, because it was not that which triggered the feeling. It was something awakening in your heart which gave you that feeling and that joyous and beautiful experience. At most, that person or that event was an incident. But now, having attached myself to that person or that relationship, I'm struggling to find through that relationship, through those interactions, all this wonderful feeling. And the more I struggle to find it, the more I seem to lose it. On the other hand, very quickly, as relationships grow and you get familiar with people, little things become irritants. Every time she coughs, it's too loud, it is too harsh, it hurts my ears. Every time she starts talking about something, it goes through the same pattern. Every time she's criticizing someone, it follows the same pattern. And after a while, you get sick of it. And there's even a reaction and a repulsion which takes place in many cases. But the idea is in all this, a form was fixed in your consciousness as the one thing or the one situation or the one circumstance. The person changes and grows, and after a while, there's nothing in common, and the relationship fades out. You fall in love again and again and again, until somewhere it settles, you get stuck, and that's it. But you'll find hundreds of books written today, how to bring the spark back in your marriage, how to rekindle the romance which has now faded after 5 years, 10 years, whatever it is. And the advice given always is, you must spice up your life. You must do things which will surprise the other. You must rekindle what drew you together right in the beginning. Go back to those places, do those things. Yes, it works maybe once, twice, because it reminds you, and then even that fades. The nature of life is that a form inherently limits. A relationship to a form is inherently limited. And the whole universe is growing. If you freeze the form and if you freeze the relationship, that is falling back as the universe grows. And at some point it becomes so stale, so old, it begins to crumble of its own. The only way that joy, that love can continue is if the form grows, the relationship grows, and most importantly, you continue to grow. And then it may happen that form and that relationship, oh yes, in teenage we had what they call puppy love. You fall in love and you think it's true love. It's not. It's an infatuation. And you experience other grades and kinds of love and relationships. But you never lose the truth of that. You still continue to recognize and acknowledge the beauty of what came in that moment, in that event, in that relationship, but now it is a small drop in a larger ocean. So even the love has grown, or it has changed form, but the love has not gone. And if seen in this perspective, if you look at the true love, it relates to each thing and everything even differently, even uniquely, but it relates to all things with love. The moment there is the narrowing and egoism in love, that is the attachment. So if you want to experience the true love, and the true love is a universal love, then necessarily one has to get free of the attachment. Because the attachment is the symptom of the egoism in the love which is limiting and preventing. So when you see the logic, almost like a mathematical equation, there's a logic to it. The conclusion we come to, unless you can be free of attachment, you cannot experience true love. This is the conclusion. Whether in an individual, in a relationship, in a circumstance, or for the whole universe, whatever it is. Unless you can get free of attachment, you cannot experience true love. But when you do, when the attachment thins out, and the true love begins to fill more and more, its character is, first, it is a universal love. And second is, it is calm. In contrast to the passion, which is narrow, fixated on a form or a situation, you change the situation, sometimes even the love goes away. So it is fixated to a form or a situation, and it has this violence. It has this agitation. It makes your heart cause a somersault. It causes pain in the very intensity of its violence. And that exhausts. It tires. And so every time you are in a relationship of the infatuation or passion, There are periods of intense passion followed by periods of separation, to rest, to recover, and then again to rebuild passion, and again rest and recover. And going back and forth, eventually one is exhausted. And then after that, you have to rekindle. But the attempt to rekindle the whole pattern is itself doomed to failure. The true love, being not in this way agitated, not of a violent passion, has still an intensity. And the nature of that, we may use an analogy. An ocean, if you've seen videos of tsunami, when there's a tsunami, the whole ocean surges up and moves, shattering buildings. But the water that is moving is calm, steady, stable. It is not waves which are crashing again and again and breaking. And so there is this very powerful, calm movement, and it can take an intensity which is far greater than the waves which crash and, in a sense, dissipate their own force. And this is wide, oceanic, universal in the way it moves, yet eternally intense. The intensity is also permanent. It is not fluctuating, now intense and then relapsing, and then intense and relapsing. So universal love we must have, calm and yet eternally intense. And the intensity is far beyond the brief vehemence of the most violent passions. And the way it works, the passion, the more violent it is, the more brief it is. And this is the extreme of the opposite. When the passion now begins to even out, it comes closer to the sustained character of the true love. The moment it moves into bursts of intensity, it moves away from that and necessarily exhausts. The more extreme, the shorter it is. So this is the first correction. And the second, what happens with the desire? He said, desire is limitation and insecurity and a hunger for pleasure and satisfaction. So what is desire reaching out to? For pleasure and satisfaction on the other end. Why is it reaching out? Because of a hunger, of a lack. Something which is not. A hole in my stomach, therefore I need to reach out and fill it with food. But the food itself, if it is sawdust or tastes like sawdust, that's not fun. It's not giving me the satisfaction. So the hunger is not to fill the hole simply. It is to feel satisfied in filling the hole. And what is it that leads to satisfaction? The sense of pleasure. So the sawdust eating didn't give me pleasure. But this pious or this cake, that gave me pleasure while eating, and it filled the hole for a while. It gave me the sense of satisfaction. But after a while, my stomach is so full, I can't eat more. But the satisfaction is not yet complete. I would like to eat more. So sometimes jokes which go like this. If I could, then I would want to eat continuously. So on the one hand, one end you're eating, on the other end you excrete. But after that, what? Will you keep on eating and you will get frustrated by the fact that you don't get satisfied? So generally what we call satisfaction is a kind of a satiation. It's not a true satisfaction. For the moment, the stomach being filled, unable to take more, the body kicks in certain chemicals. I don't feel like eating more. I wish I could eat more. I wish I had 5 mouths. These are the kinds of jokes which you'll find even in traditional yogic literature. I wish I had 5 mouths so I could eat far more. The cow is so lucky it has 5 stomachs, and so on. But the satisfaction is not. It is satiation. Or the other extreme, I am fed up. I am sick of eating sweets. I need a change. And so you now struggle, crave for the change, which also eventually you get sick of and you need to move to something else. So an incapacity to take in the whole. But right from the beginning, there was a an emptiness, a hole which you needed to fill. So a lack, and then reaching out to something which will fill the lack in an experience of pleasure, which should lead to some kind of satisfaction, even if momentary. So desire is a limitation and insecurity in a hunger for pleasure and satisfaction. So you have a limitation, you have an insecurity, and with that insecurity you reach out with a hunger to somehow fill that limitation, and even in the act of filling you have a limitation. It is not the other side, which is seeking after the divine delight in things. Now this is completely different. You will not see any connection. Here in the seeking after divine delight in things, you're not seeking for a thing. You're not trying to fill a hole. You are not aiming at a satisfaction of pleasure. There's no connection at all. And yet you will see how this is leading to that by a correction. There is a kind of a continuity in the transition. So let's look at what we mean by seeking after divine delight in things. Not the thing itself, but in the thing there is a divine delight. So if the flower, if the food is not going to give me the divine delight, there is the delight in the thing which I'm going to seek. And in the act of seeking that, I am not so much concerned with the packaging of the form. So whether it came through a cake or whether it came through the sawdust like tasting meal, you will still find behind that form, behind that packaging is hidden that divine delight. How do we get to that? I don't feel it, I don't experience it. I only know the satisfaction of my taste buds. So there is a transition in which one awakens to that perception even. And the means for that he describes a delight in things rooted in a delight in God that does not adhere to their forms, but to that which they conceal in themselves, and that embraces the universe without being caught in its meshes. So this is a long one, but everything is captured in a single statement. So the universe is like a mesh, jal in Sanskrit, like the net which the fisherman throws, that's the jal. But the mesh is also Indra jala, Indra's net, Indra's mesh. It's very deeply suggestive. And Indra's mesh is described like this, that it is full of pearls which are woven together, gems. And it is so arranged that every gem reflects all the others. And within each reflection, you find all of them all over again. You see, the description is holographic, fractal. All these are modern terms to describe something very simple. There is only one gem, but one in multiple representations, but deeply woven together by a single thread, because the oneness is always underlying. The forms appear to be different and separate, and yet each form is secretly woven with all others, tied to them, and reflecting them, contains them in itself, and all of them all over again within. And this is the true nature of the reality. But if we do not see what is inside, and we look at the separateness of all these gems, we get stuck in the mesh like the fish. We are trapped. We are unable to be free. We are unable to swim through the ocean and play and experience its wideness and its freedom or its completeness. We're stuck in a little portion. So, without being caught in its meshes, the meshes of the universe, every time there is an attachment, you're caught there. And sometimes the attachments become so binding that you're unable to free yourself, and eventually you have to wait for death to free you from this form, so that the attachments through this form are also freed and you can start afresh next time. carrying the lessons from this one in a different environment, different situation. So, without being caught in its meshes. So, what do? The delight in things rooted in a delight in God that does not adhere to their forms. So the first focus is not to the forms, but to that which they conceal in themselves, which delight is the delight in God. So you are looking not at the object, but at the delight of the divine presence within that object. And you seek that delight, or you seek the roots of that delight there in the divine presence in each object. So when you take the food, it is the cake, you become aware first of the divine presence in it. The divine presence in the form, okay, perhaps you can visualize something, but the divine presence in the taste. So as you put it on your tongue, rather than focusing on the sensation it creates in your tongue and in your mind, you dwell on the divine presence in the sensation. You dwell on the idea of the sensation itself as a color, as an expression of the divine delight. You become aware that the one who is experiencing this sensation is not you, because you don't exist as a separate thing, is the divine in you which is enjoying the food. It is the divine in you meeting the divine in the cake, and the contact of the divine meeting the divine, and the delight revealed in that contact, which is the sparkle of the taste and the enjoyment that you experience. And you put your whole attention on that. And when you're able to hold that attention, the experience of it is completely different. I had a strange experience to share on this account. We were in a retreat once, and we had a discussion about this, and we had just been in a very intense concentration in the retreat, and we had discussed how when we go back to lunch, we will continue this mood of keeping the awareness of the divine presence, enjoying the divine in the food. And when we came back from that, people had very interesting narrations. So one of them went like this: there was a chili. So staying in that state of concentration, he took the chili and bit into it, and it tasted wonderful. And then immediately the mind kicked in. Is it really possible? And he picks up the chili and then ate it the same way as he would normally, without that state of concentration on the presence within. And immediately the mouth was inflamed. But the difference can be so radical. But it is an exercise, at first even I would say a skill, to be able to hold that attention on this. Of course, this happens naturally. It happens spontaneously as we dwell on the awareness of the divine in things. And so depending on what particular starting point we have in our practice, through the karma yoga, or through the bhakti yoga, or even the jnana yoga, the perception of the divine and the relation with the divine in the world, in things, in actions, in activities, in ourselves, and the meeting of the divine with the divine, whatever way we start, eventually we come to this. And the key is this: a delight in things rooted in a delight in God. So our focus is on the divine consciousness. And through that, we enjoy the thing or the delight of the divine in that thing. That does not adhere to their forms. So the forms are there, and in a sense we do enjoy the forms, but secondarily. And it does not attach to the form, but the continent of the form. So the form may change, you still enjoy it. When you approach food in this way, you will find the first thing is, you will find joy in whatever food you have. So normally what happens, let's say someone has prepared your favorite, whatever dal or rice it is, and the person will ask you, is it good? And your reference for is it good will be, is it that which you're familiar in appreciation? And inevitably everybody says, my mother is the best cook, because that's the familiarity rooted from childhood. And so if what you made is similar to what my mother made, then I say it's good. If it's not, then I say, you should put more salt. or you should put less salt. I wish you'd put a few drops of lemon. Then it could come closer to what I expected as my narrow definition of familiarity of good. You see where it moves. There's a narrow band which you are used to, which is your definition of good. At a biological level, even instinctive level. Anything varying from that is not correct. Now, if you go from state to state in India, they'll find a similar meal prepared in completely different ways, and variations of taste and emphasis in each. And so a person will make a general statement, oh, these people don't make it the way it should be made. And the way it should be made is the way my state, my tradition, my family makes it. But if you think about it from a universal, very objective perspective, each one of these styles of making, and each variation that you will make in your whole lifetime, because no meal is ever exactly the same, each one of them is one of the colors, one of the facets of the play of the divine delight. And so when you first step back from this personal attachment and desire linking you to the food type and habit, whatever food is given to you, if someone asks, is it good? Your first response would be, yes, it is perfect in the way it is made for that purpose. It is different from what my mother makes, perhaps, but it is perfect in this way. And it's a trick which I play sometimes. It's a joke, but it reflects this truth. When someone prepares a meal which is an experiment, and perhaps it's got slightly burnt, or it's too salty, or too much of something or the other, so they say, is it good? Or what shall we call it? I say, this is such and such a variation of this meal. So depending on the kind of variation, if there is more sugar, we will say it is a Gujarati variation. If there is more sour, then it is a Karnataka variation. If it is more chili, it is an Andhra variation. If it is, you give it any name. And if you don't know what to name it, take any exotic country which you know nothing about. It is an Estonian variation of this. Wonderful. But as it is, in that variation, it's perfect. If you think about it, everything is perfect in itself for what it carries, for what it conveys of that particular color and shade of the divine delight. And when one meets life in this way, in that consciousness, everything is enjoyable uniquely, and nothing is ever repeated exactly the same. And there's almost like a continuity of all possible variations. Does not adhere to their forms, but to that which they conceal in themselves. You are attached to that which they conceal in themselves, which is the delight in God. And to that you're attached, and that is what you see common across all these. And shades of that, its delight, its infinite variations of delight in all the forms. And even the forms can change. Your relationship with the form can change. Wonderful. It's just shades, colors of the same delight in God. And as a result, from this consciousness, you can see what are you repelled from? Nothing. What are you attached to? Nothing. Because each thing is equally a shade and variation of the same divine delight. But uniquely, distinctly, you can say, I enjoy this more than that, but I'm not attached to this as opposed to that. And when you look, where is the limit? Nowhere. The whole universe and every experience of the universe. So automatically, that embraces the universe. And yet, because you're not entangled anywhere, without being caught in its meshes. So this is the nature of the delight which we have when we get free from the desire. So when you get free from attachment, you can open out to this true universal love. And when you get free from desire, you can experience the true delight in things universally. And so that will be the motivation, the drive, the thing which makes life worthwhile in this approach of the true renunciation. There's an incident from the life of Swami Vivekananda. He was, as a Bengali, from the habit of the family. He loved to eat potol. What do you call it in English? It's a particular vegetable, common in Bengal, very much appreciated. And he would love to have that wherever he went. He would ask for it, or it would be given because people knew it. And then one day, one of his disciples asked, Swamiji, why are you so attached to potol? And Swami Vivekananda said, no, I'm not attached to it. And just to prove to you, I will never have potol again for the rest of my life. And that's it. He set it aside, and that's it. He had a lesson to teach, of course, so he had to show that he could do it for the rest of his life, but also that he could set it aside without any sense of reaction. The test of attachment is always this. When the thing to which you're attached, or the negative of it that you're attached to, as the case may be, when it is removed, what is the response in you? If something shakes, if there is a tremor, if there is some disturbance, that means there was an attachment, a desire implied. When there is complete freedom from attachment, you can move, you can change, you can throw, you can modify, bring it close, take it far. You enjoy the colors of all these variations of the delight. So he set it aside. That was it. He never again took it. So of course the disciple would have regretted, but the lesson which he demonstrated is extremely valuable. That you can enjoy something fully without being attached. And Sri Aurobindo, in a sense, he explains that's what he was trying to convey when he continued smoking even after beginning yoga, and continued to smoke his pipe for a long time, until at some point the mother made a face that the smoke was not nice. And I think she said that it would set a bad precedent for the disciples who would take that as an excuse. Oh, Sri Aurobindo smoked, so what's wrong if we smoke? That's the normal. So Sri Aurobindo just set it aside, never picked it up again, no withdrawal symptoms, nothing. Just that. But the nature of this freedom from attachment in the senses, even in the biological instinct, when it is freed from that attachment and desire, you can take something, enjoy it, refuse it, and enjoy it equally, and there is no disturbance anywhere. So we read this again, and you see now how much it captures. And this does not mean that there is nothing at all that we shall love, nothing in which we shall take delight. For attachment is egoism in love, and not love itself. Desire is limitation and insecurity in a hunger for pleasure and satisfaction, and not the seeking after the divine delight in things. A universal love we must have, calm and yet eternally intense, beyond the brief vehemence of the most violent passion. A delight in things rooted in a delight in God, that does not adhere to their forms, but to that which they conceal in themselves, and that embraces the universe without being caught in its meshes. In a footnote, Sri Aurobindo elaborates on this last, not being caught in its meshes. He puts the word in Sanskrit, nirlipta. Nir, not, lipta, pasted, attached, stuck. So, not stuck, not attached, not clinging, is the word which he uses from the Bhagavad Gita in this context. And he explains the divine ananda in things is nishkama and nirlipta, free from desire and therefore not attached. Nishkama, kama being desire, no desire, and nirlipta, no attachment. So he is linking this to the text of the Gita and the insistence that the Gita has similarly on this principle. And you will recall also the Isha Upanishad describes the whole world as intended for enjoyment. But the condition for true enjoyment is to have no desire. By that renounced, thou shouldst enjoy. Tena tyaktena bhunjita, that you must enjoy, the Rishi says, but by renunciation first. And this is what Sri Aurobindo is describing here in minute detail. Should we pause here if there are any comments, any questions? Because this is quite an intense passage. Anything that comes up? Yes? Yes, we can see it.
Seventy years ago, my cousins used to rush off from Latin and go into ashrams. Detach themselves completely, surrender, and that's all. But it's not very fashionable now. They have to do it twice. You're not there. So, what do you find here? I mean, I got from India here. Hundreds of people in the morning are having to rush to get into the bus. And with these terrible problems. Or there's a heavy rain, not enough to pray. Or there's a temple here where people, well-to-do people are going into the temple for Tuesday. And yet you've got beggars lined up there and absolutely dirty things. And today I saw a female dog die. Nobody's doing anything. I thought that it should be sent on to the lake. So my question here is, what's the question of attachment to the
Yes. Yes. Okay. Yes, a good question. So there are two parts to what he is saying. One is that he says in the past people used to rush to ashrams, and now it's no more fashionable. But on the other hand is his observation around the temple, so much dirt and filth and poverty and things like that. So there is obviously a mixture of many different things here. First is that there are cycles in human development where certain things become fashionable because there is something in the instinct which finds it useful. And then it becomes a fashion, people rush. When the use of that is exhausted, it cannot help you anymore grow. Somehow it becomes uninteresting. And instinctively, the group turns to, the herd turns to something else which is now more interesting, which gives you value in terms of growth and experience. So yes, at some point it was fashionable to go to ashrams and to read philosophical texts. But then after a point, when something had to be learnt was done, it found that insufficient in the human instinct, in humanity. It was insufficient, and it turned to a kind of a materialism, a satisfaction of the senses, of comforts, to take it a little further. And then having gone through those comforts, again it comes to a new cycle where those comforts are insufficient, and it turns again towards a deeper study of matters spiritual, but on a new foundation.
Almost all over the world,
yes.
It's almost absurd because we all know
yes.
we are all one. If you see the problem with the Syrian migrants and this and that, the starvation in Africa, some actions actually. I don't think it's related to attachment.
No. So we'll come to that. So the point is there are these cycles. In the new interest, people are no more interested in an ascetic ashram, in a withdrawal from life. But they want somehow to study these texts in how it applies to their life. So you will find books like Bhagavad Gita for the manager, Bhagavad Gita in the corporate world, Wisdom from Upanishads for corporate life. So while 100 years ago, it was Bhagavad Gita and Wisdom of Upanishads for renunciation of life. Now it is within the domain of life that you're trying to apply that same knowledge. So these are cycles through which one has to pass through. But in the practice, eventually, this principle of renunciation comes. And all the texts of the new management style, based on the Bhagavad Gita or the Upanishads, will say, unless you are detached from your circumstances, you cannot have a clear perspective, and therefore you cannot take a right decision. So the practice of renunciation is now taken into the corporate domain, where the manager who has to take a critical decision must stand back from the situation, must be equal to all possibilities, must be even free of his own limitations, of his own preferences and attachments, if he has to see rightly and act rightly. So these principles that we are discussing are applicable in all circumstances of life in the midst of the battle. The person who has to take a decision in a war circumstance, especially in the war situation, any decision you take involves lives, involves destruction, involves suffering of others. And yet you have to choose between one or the other. And choosing the lesser of the evil in the short term may cause greater evil in the long term. So your vision has to see the big picture in time, in space, and choose rightly within that, which will lead to the greatest, best outcome in the long run for the largest humanity. But it will always involve still suffering and pain and death and struggle, etc. So that's when you have to be able to stand back from all personal preferences and be completely free in your renunciation of all attachments and see truly and then act from that freedom. So the next paragraph actually takes up this. So these are human feelings. Yes.
In terms of this divine delight in things, my understanding, it's not as simple as not just having attachment or desire. It could be also, for example, letting go of past associations.
Yes.
For example, when you've been talking about food, it could be a particular food item gave you a certain violent reaction.
Yes. Yes, so you've used a different vocabulary. When you say past association, is a habit of the past and your attachment to that form, that habit. It is still attachment in essence. You see?
It could be a person.
It could be a person, it could be a relationship, a situation, sensory experience, an emotional experience, a thought, mindset.
So that's negative. That is attachment in the
All these are limiting habits. And our attachment, our binding to that habit or that pattern, which we have to get free of.
And how?
So, how there are many things one can do on a smaller level, and then there's one thing you can do on a larger level, which is to be able to identify with the true self, which is always, as a backdrop, supporting everything in the universe equally, including the dog struggling on the road, including the whole galaxy, equally supporting both. That true equality is natural to the self. So to the extent that our own individual consciousness leans back to rest in the self, we experience or share in its equality. So this is the big solution. In the small solutions on different levels, in the way the mind works, in the way the emotions work, in the way our senses operate, we work in these to loosen these threads consciously, so that each of these different functions can become more equal, more free, more detached, and therefore through each of these you can experience the divine delight more completely. So the next paragraph actually takes this from the perspective of the mind and how we are to free the mind. I wanted to give another example before we move to that. The analogy of the difference between pleasure, satisfaction on one side, pleasure, pain, satisfaction or dissatisfaction on one side, and the experience of delight. To understand this distinction, we can see, as an analogy, our experience when we watch a movie or a play. While watching the movie, when you identify with the leading character, and the leading character is undergoing some great suffering, pain, let's say it is a tragedy, you weep with him. You feel the pain that he feels. And yet all the time in your mind, you know, this is just a movie, these are merely actors, and none of it was real. You see him jumping from a great height, trying to jump over sharp things, and your body flinches. You know very well the whole thing was done with cinema effects on the computer. You know it, and yet in the identification, your body flinches. When the pain becomes too much, you dissociate from the movie, dissociate from your identification with the character. You shake your head, look away, and immediately that's a movie, that's not real, and your heart is no more disturbed. Once the intense passage passes, you reconnect, you re-enter in the identification, and now you enjoy or suffer with the character. But throughout, something in you is enjoying that experience, even as he suffers, and you suffer with him because of identification. You enjoy that experience of the pathos, of the grief. And you come away saying, what a beautiful tragedy. How beautifully it was presented. Yes.
I want to mention something. When you read in Gayatri, formerly I had difficulties to understand you when he describes his mother, the big creator and all that. When he says and uses that word violent and passion quite a few times.
Yes.
More violent passions.
Yes.
And it's not necessarily meant that you tame it down. It is violent passion.
Yes, it is.
Because everything what we experience here is pain and violence and pain
Yes.
and terror, and it's all in her.
Yes.
She created that.
Yes.
So it's
Yes.
that part is in her. And there is the delight in creating
Yes.
and experiencing.
Yes.
And that's
Yes.
the mother.
Yes.
She has that, and we have that also.
Right.
And that's responsible. No,
Yes, you're not responsible.
I'm not. But I mean, it's not something we are, this is bad or this is good. Because she is so bad. If you look at it from that viewpoint, she has
Yes.
that. She created this.
The divine is as evil as the most evil person, and as good as the most good person,
So much.
and worse than both. More extreme than both.
I understood that.
But this is one level. This is one level of the truth. So the example she has given of the passion of the Divine Mother is the passion we are experiencing in ourselves. But there's another passion which is above this. It's a different order of passion, which is the passion of the free consciousness, where she can burst out a whole universe into manifestation or extinguish an entire galaxy just as a play, as a bursting out of the delight and the joy. But how that can be joyous, we can only understand when we recognize that joy or the delight is of a consciousness which is essentially free. So like a child who's constructed a whole sand castle, and after he is done everything, everyone has appreciated it, he breaks it up. And he enjoys the breaking up. If you see the way children break it, they go minutely and try different ways of breaking, making it break down under its own weight by pulling the lowest beam, and everything collapses. And there's a joy in making it collapse after having constructed it like this. But all of this is possible when there is a consciousness or a layer behind which is essentially not attached to this. If I've made my castle and I'm so attached to it that I have to protect it, and now the water comes, the sea wants to wash it away, and I start crying, then I cannot enjoy either the construction or its breaking down.
But there is a difference between the attachment and being bound to it.
Yes.
Because you cannot break that bondage. There is a very strong bondage that's even stronger than that.
Yes. So in the highest station of the Divine Mother, she is all things equally, and so is bound to none. So she can create this beautiful thing and then extinguish it equally because it is herself. There's no other. So extinguish it equally with the same delight and enjoy the pathos and the grief of the breakdown in the individual, while on the universal scale enjoy even the violent rush of the destruction. And that's the nature of the enjoyment of her liberated consciousness. It can at the same time take the burden of the suffering of the ant that is crushed, while enjoy the runner who is running across, not realizing he has crushed the ant. And they are not contradictory. You see, to the human mind, when we identify with one piece, the ant suffers, the runner enjoys. But to her, both are aspects of a delight, because they're not separate, they're all herself. And it is only when we recover this consciousness, which is free, equal, that we can experience fully the true nature of that delight. So I'm using this analogy of the movie. And you see what happens in the movie. The part in you that identifies with the player is a very narrow frontal part. So in the middle of the movie, in that most intense pathos, there's this tension which is there between the protagonist and the antagonist. And you're listening to each word and they're making these brilliant statements. Suddenly your mobile phone rings. And what does it do? It breaks that immersion, and you're reminded of the reality outside the movie theater. And you say, oh, you spoiled this beautiful experience. And then you re-engage. But it shows that throughout, this other reality was always there. It's not gone. We set it aside to create a special narrow front of focus of identification. That narrow front of focus of identification is this personality that I call me. And I have so focused myself into it, in this mind, life, body, I've forgotten that world. Like when you come out of the movie hall, having been immersed for 3 hours in a wonderful movie, you look out and it's like slightly disorienting. You reconnect back to the world. Oh yeah, what are the things I had to do? You look at your phone, it's a different thing. You're shifting between two domains. During that exclusive identification, you had forgotten everything else, although it was still there. And that's the truth of us. Although we are self, in that exclusive focus of identification with this personality, we've forgotten that freedom. But it is there. And we've forgotten how to get back to it. So although now we read and we understand, oh yeah, I have to get back to self. Where is my self? I don't get it. But once you experience it, and the thread linking is felt, you find, oh yeah, now with familiarity, with memory, you're able to lean back, recover, reconnect, and swing back and forth between that and this. You can re-enter the identification of the personality, enjoy the movie of the world, step back into a greater freedom, and be master of the movie, and as director of the movie, change the movie, play with it, etc. Yes.
Yesterday I talked to people who said that as boys, one enjoyed killing frogs and another one birds. So everyone found this strange. I asked them why everyone did that. If the person was a parent or a teacher,
Yes.
in the light of this thing, everything is divine delight, then you shouldn't think that.
So, yes. So if a person is doing something perverse, killing animals and getting pleasure in it, that is a perversion. It is still pleasure and not delight. But the soul within, who is still in that free consciousness, is experiencing delight in all the experiences. The surface personality may have pleasure, pain, and even perversions. But that's not delight. Innately, you know the difference will be when it has an opposite. Then it is part of the spectrum of the divided consciousness of duality. When you come to the consciousness of delight, there is no opposite. All is colors of one delight. So in the relative world, yes, you see all these things, and there are perversions, especially in the personality, where the perversion is possible because there is ego and desire and attachment, which have exaggerated one point, one aspect to an extreme and created on it a new habit. So for example, you can say tasting sweet food or soft, mild tastes are pleasurable. But once the tongue has been numbed by eating a lot of chili, you need very strong and harsh stimulation to feel anything. And so this person enjoys extremely spicy, hot, or even extremes of taste. And that is almost a perversion. It is not moving, it is a perversion. It is not moving to greater sensitivity and refinement. It is moving to coarseness and insensitivity. It is barbaric. So these are perversions and distortions possible in the domain of dualities. But the spiritual manifestation, remember our bigger goal again, fulfillment of the divine in the human being and in the world, would require us to bring and express that delight into all these experiences, which would require the correction of these distortions and perversions. Which means in those parts equally, one has to establish the freedom of the non-attachment and non-desire. So in the next paragraph, Sri Aurobindo describes this freeing from the attachment in the thought and in the action. And he describes the self-will means an egoism in the mind which attaches itself to its preferences, its habits, its past or present formations of thought and view, and will, because it regards them as itself or its own, weaves around them the delicate thread of I-ness and my-ness, and lives in them like a spider in its web. It hates to be disturbed as a spider hates attack on its web, and feels foreign and unhappy if transplanted to fresh viewpoints and formations, as a spider feels foreign in another web than its own. This attachment must be entirely excised from the mind. Now this is just taking the domain of mind where he describes this. So I've just taken a sentence in between to show you the overall approach of the paragraph. The same thing would have to be done in the emotions and eventually in the very root of the sense of ego, of separateness. But this portion in the mind, when he describes the spider web, it's very interesting because also the image, although vivid and it resonates deep inside us, it suggests many interesting things and the way the mind works. And you see the spider web, everything is interconnected. You pick one point and pull it, the whole web moves. So our preference and mindset in the way it works, you pick one point and pull it, the whole mindset tilts. And this is what I was referring to in the beginning when I said advertisers very carefully and in a very sophisticated way use this to manipulate our thought processes. And even when you know you're being manipulated and the mechanism of the manipulation, you're unable to be free of it. I'll just give one example. If you had to make a rough guess of what would be whether a meal at the ashram, whether a meal in a normal kitchen that you cook at home costs 10,000 rupees to make. If not, what would be your estimate? Very quickly, what's the first number that comes to your mind? And the number which comes to your mind will be large. Because I put a reference of 10,000, it's like the whole spider web was pulled in that direction and all your subsequent thoughts are pulled in that direction. If you set one or two pegs like this, one can lead the mind to think in a particular way and influence your decision. And this is the game that advertisers play. The whole thing is developed into a very sophisticated science, but it describes the way the mindset is formed as a web with all these interconnected preferences of ideas that you tickle one and all the others near it are pulled. You tickle another and the others near it are pulled. So you can create a mood in the mind by using a few key ideas, a few key pegs and references. And suddenly the outcome is very different. So they give examples, and these are studies done. A judge has to pass a judgment condemning a murderer for so many years of prison. Now, the normal range in that legal system is between 2 years and 4 years. If the lawyer says, Your Honor, this man deserves 10 years, what do you think the judge will choose? He'll come back from 10 till he hits 4. If the lawyer says, this man, he deserves only 1 month, what will the judge do? He will move from 1 month upwards and hit 2 or nearabouts 2. 2 years of your life depend on what vocabulary the lawyer used at random, which is completely ridiculous. Knowing this full well, you will still end up making that slant this way or that way. And these are done in repeated studies. People are told, this is what we are going to do to you. And still they end up exactly behaving in this way. That's the extent to which we are victims of our own mindset. Like the spider bound to the web that he weaves. He is attached to it because it's his own creation. And how to get free of these mental constructions and habits, that's the skill which we have to develop. And the method for doing that, he will be describing in the next paragraph, which we will continue from after a gap of 3 weeks on 18th of December. And in between, for those who are interested, we will continue to show recordings of earlier talks. Thank you. Thank
you. If you want to, you're using words which you seem to be accepting. You're saying manipulate or evicted. What's the meaning of those words? Why are they accepting these words?
Yes.
Okay. I'll see you later.
Sure. So it's a fascinating piece, and the text it really makes us aware of the nature of the entanglement. Yes. Yeah, sure. Surely. We have time.
Because we expand too much this attachment subject. I have a little doubt when you told your example about the tragic movie.
Okay? Yeah, okay.
For example,
yes, tragic movie.
I was thinking it's more, for me, it's feeding our vital than attachment. Why we call it attachment? This kind of thing is like when you are no reason for that.
Yes. So that is the desire. So no, the attachment is the mechanism by which you identify with the person playing the role in the movie. And then the excitement which you experience is the play of that desire. You get a high, an emotional high, even in the tragedy. And the nature of that high is such, if it happened to you in life, you would be crushed. But here in the movie hall, it is safe because you know it will end after a period. So you're having an experience which you could never have in life in a safe way, but which something in you enjoys. And the desire, the craving to have those highs of experiences, and the attachment is the mechanism by which you have it. You see? Yes. And you allow yourself to. If it was a choice in real life, you would stop short of that extreme pain. But in the movie hall, knowing it's going to end after 2 hours, knowing it's a tragedy, you came to watch it because people said it was a great movie. You have allowed yourself, and even you will see you modulate. When it becomes too much, you disengage. You reduce the identification and the attachment, right? And then again, when it's safe, you reconnect, and then you follow the story in identification. Yes, yeah, exactly. You enjoy it.
We like some food more than other, of course. If I don't like the food, I cannot eat it anyway. But we like some food more than other. We like it. It's maybe it's similar to desire. But if I don't have it, for example, I don't mind. Is it attachment or what? It's only the fight to like it.
So there are different parts in us which have attachments. Sometimes the sensory attachment. For example, a smoker, when he gives up smoking, experiences a craving. His mind says, I don't want to smoke. His emotion is disgusted with himself for having broken his vows so many times, but his body starts itching. Right? So it's happening at that level where even mind and emotions are not involved. It's energy in body, in nerves, in sensations. And if you oppose it, that energy can react, your hands start trembling perhaps. Those are what we call withdrawal symptoms. The same thing can happen with food if you're extremely hungry. Now this happens when your hunger is really pushed to a limit, and then you have strong smells of tasty food hit you. You'll find after a while your body is pushing and even your hands can shake. Exactly. Right. So that's the attachment in the nervous system at that level. But if at that point you're able to take a deep breath, disengage consciously, you can stop all those symptoms and be free. You tell yourself, I will wait another half hour, no problem. You're able to do that. But if you don't make the effort, you're swayed in the habit of that identification.
I want to ask you.
Yes.
You will laugh now, but it's an example for me. For example, there is some food in France which I like very much. Okay? But when I go to France, I am happy to eat it, really happy to explain. But when I came here for 10 months, I forget it completely.
Yes.
I even don't think about
Yes.
it. So where is the attachment?
So the moment you see it, after 10 months, the moment you see it, it pulls you. So the attachment is subsiding for a while, but it is there latent. So we have many things like this. Remember spider web, many web lines going all around. So many things which may remain subsiding because something else fills the gap for a while. Also, an environment can make a difference. Here you are in an environment where things are more free naturally. So effortlessly your thoughts are different. You go back to an environment and the thoughts of other people fill your mind and you get pulled into their way of thinking and their habits. I don't know if you have noticed this.
No, I understand that anything we like is attachment. Yeah, because no, what I said, the example I gave, really I don't feel any attachment. I mean,
Yes.
I don't have it, I don't think.
Yes. So it's possible.
Here, I like.
So if it's possible that you enjoy it without attachment. Can you, when it's shown to you, can you say, all right, today I won't take it and not feel disturbed? Then I will say you don't have attachment. That's good. Yes.
You spoke about the true equality of the soul.
Yes.
And you said that's at a higher level. And then the smaller level.
So we have to train. So there are two things. There is the consciousness which has to be freed in the sense of I. I have to get free. And then there is the habit of the machinery in your nature which has to be disengaged and freed. Both have to be worked upon. Because our goal is to transform the nature, not to cut out and abandon nature. So in the mind's thinking, there is a certain habit. So we will teach the mind to become quiet, to stand back, and to be free of these habitual modes, and then to act from a greater freedom. Same with the heart. So we have to teach these parts in their functioning to become more detached.
So it's getting more conscious and attentive.
But who is teaching it? You, the person who stands back from your mind and your heart. Right? So there are two different levels of working. If you are not free from your own emotions, you cannot work upon them. If you don't stand back from your own thoughts, you can't change their patterns.
So initially it becomes a conscious practice.
Yes.
I mean,
Yes.
it's an effort-based practice.
Yes, there has to be an effort. But the nature of the effort, which was discussed in the previous paragraphs, was purification. The discipline was purification of the mind, which was to teach them to become still and to disengage from their past habits and to separate their entanglements, one influencing the other.
That will be discussed.
Yes, yes. So this is the other side, which is to get free in order to be able to make that more effective.
That was your last lecture?
No, it was the previous chapter. The last two chapters discuss this. Concentration and purification as the right hand of a positive effort you make, and the renunciation, which is the left hand, which is the removal of the obstacles to the effort that you make. So, yes.
I wonder, even if one doesn't have yet the perfect spiritual quality, that, for example, attachment to food is a problem of the vital. So if you give the vital something more satisfying, you can stop doing that. Stop doing that.
Okay. So attachment to food can be on all three levels. It can be at a sensory level. I crave a sweet every time I finish eating a meal. And if somehow that day there is no sweet, I feel strange. There are people who have a habit of ending a meal with papad. If you don't have papad, the meal is not complete. And it's at a sensory level. There's no logic to it. The other is at an emotional level, or a vital level, as you say, where the greed comes in and kicks in, and that is something more conscious. But there can be also mental attachment. I want to eat only food which is, in my understanding, the healthy, nutritional, uh, bio, organic food, etc. So I'm attached to that particular form of food. And if you give me something which is not that, I get disturbed. So it could be on any level, even with the food. Or I like my food laid out in this particular way, given to me at this particular time. Even those kinds of attachments people have, and they get upset if you don't lay it out this way. Nikola Tesla had this thing with threes. He wanted the spoons to be in three, napkin to be in three. Some weird habit, but still, all these things can happen.
Because actually, in one sense, divine delight is the ultimate satisfaction.
So that is already happening on some level. Your inmost soul is enjoying all this. Through all the clutter and drama of your surface personality's experience of life, the inmost soul is enjoying it like it's enjoying a movie from its status of freedom and saying, oh, this is an interesting experience, that is an interesting experience. And sometimes it can pull you back. If there is a real shock, it can pull you back. It's like when you're in the movie and something happens which is too intense, you choose to disengage. So similarly, the soul pulls you back, and that happens when there's a shock, often with some person who dies suddenly and things like that. And suddenly you step back and say, what if life can end so easily? What am I here for? What am I doing? What do I really want? And at that point, you are reflecting a deeper truth, a deeper seeking. But then gradually, once again, you get pulled into the normal routine of life. It is even possible as an exercise, when you have any experience, to take a detached view and look at the big picture and see how this helps you. It's not the soul's seeing, but it is sharing in the perspective as the soul would see. And so when you're going through a crisis in life, rather than saying, oh, poor me, you step back. How would my soul see it? Oh, it would see it as a very interesting learning experience where I'm learning to overcome this, overcome that, deal with this challenge which I was avoiding for so long. And so your mind is taking a stance, standing back from the situation as the soul would see, and already that helps you to get free and share in a larger, deeper vision. And then if you can consciously even concentrate and open yourself through that like a gateway, you can begin to see and even feel the soul's seeing through that as a gateway. So these are things we can all do even in a normal routine of life. Oh.